Mark had always been the epitome of a devoted husband. To anyone who knew him, he was a man who cherished his wife, Emily, with all his heart. Their marriage, which had blossomed over the years, seemed like an unshakable bond, a partnership built on trust, love, and mutual respect. Mark had always believed that he and Emily were meant to be, soulmates destined to grow old together. However, this illusion of marital bliss was shattered one evening when Mark stumbled upon something that would forever change his life. It was a typical Wednesday evening, and Mark had just returned from work. Emily was out with friends, so he decided to take advantage of the quiet house and catch up on some emails. As he reached for his phone, which was charging on the kitchen counter, he accidentally knocked over Emily's phone, causing it to light up. A message preview appeared on the screen, catching Mark's attention. It was from someone named Chris, a name that Mark didn't recognize. Curiosity got the better of him, and he swiped the screen to reveal the full message. What he read made his heart sink. "Can't wait to see you again tonight. Last night was amazing. I love you, babe." Mark felt as though the ground beneath him had disappeared. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the rest of the conversation, his worst fears confirmed with every word. Emily had been cheating on him, and not just once. It was an ongoing affair, one filled with passion and deceit. The realization hit him like a freight train. The woman he had loved and trusted with his entire being had betrayed him in the most painful way possible. But Mark was not the kind of man to lash out in anger. As waves of sorrow and rage washed over him, he made a decision that would require every ounce of his self-control. Instead of confronting Emily then and there, he chose to conceal his discovery. Mark knew that reacting impulsively would not satisfy the deep sense of betrayal he felt. No. Emily deserved something far more calculated, something that would make her regret ever crossing him. With a heavy heart, Mark carefully placed Emily's phone back on the counter and walked away. The devastation inside him was almost unbearable, but he forced himself to maintain a facade of normalcy. From that moment on, he would pretend that everything was as it had always been. He would smile, laugh, and continue being the loving husband Emily thought she had fooled. But beneath the surface, Mark was already beginning to plot his revenge, a revenge that would ensure Emily would never forget the pain she had caused him. The game had begun, and Mark was determined to come out on top. In the days following his discovery, Mark's behavior towards Emily was nothing short of masterful. He continued to play the role of the doting husband, careful not to give away the storm brewing inside him. Yet, he knew he couldn't simply ignore what he had found. If his plan was to work, he needed to plant the seeds of doubt in Emily's mind, to make her squirm ever so slightly before delivering the final blow. One evening, about a week after discovering the affair, Mark decided it was time to initiate the first phase of his plan. They were having dinner at their favorite restaurant, a quaint little place they often visited on special occasions. The evening was calm, with the warm glow of candlelight casting soft shadows across their table. Mark looked at Emily, his face a mask of serenity, though his mind was racing. "Emily," he began, his voice calm but laced with a hint of something unspoken. "Do you ever feel like we've lost something in our marriage?" Emily's fork froze midair, and for a split second, Mark saw a flash of panic in her eyes, but she quickly recovered, forcing a smile. "What do you mean, honey?" Mark took a sip of his wine, holding her gaze. "I don't know. It's just a feeling, like we've been so busy with our lives that we've forgotten about us. I miss how we used to be, don't you?" Emily visibly relaxed, the tension in her shoulders easing. She let out a small laugh, dismissing the conversation as typical marital concerns. "I know what you mean. Things have been hectic lately, but I'm still here, Mark. I love you." Mark nodded, allowing a small, almost sad smile to form on his lips. "I love you too, Emily. And that's why I think we need a fresh start, a chance to focus on us again." Emily's eyes softened, the guilt she had been carrying buried deep beneath layers of rationalization. "What do you have in mind?" "Here," Mark laid out the next step of his plan. "I've been thinking, how about we go on a second honeymoon? Just the two of us, away from everything. We could go somewhere exotic, somewhere we've never been before. It'll be just like old times." The suggestion caught Emily by surprise. It was exactly what she needed, a way to convince herself that Mark was still clueless, that their marriage could still be salvaged. Her relief was palpable, and she eagerly nodded. "That sounds amazing! Where were you thinking?" Mark leaned back, a look of careful consideration on his face. "I was thinking somewhere far away, where we can truly disconnect. How about the Maldives? It's beautiful, private, and the perfect place to rekindle what we have." Emily's excitement was almost childlike. She reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "That sounds perfect, Mark. I can't wait." Mark squeezed her hand gently, his eyes locking onto hers. "Me neither, Emily. Me neither." As they made plans for their getaway, Emily felt a sense of security wash over her. She had been terrified that Mark might have suspected something, but now all those fears seemed unfounded. He was still the loving husband she had always known, and she was convinced that this trip would be the fresh start they needed. Little did she know, Mark's forgiveness was nothing more than an elaborate charade, a prelude to the cold, calculated vengeance that awaited her. The trip was set. The tickets were booked, and the days leading up to their departure were filled with laughter and preparations. To Emily, it seemed as if the dark cloud that had hung over their marriage was finally dissipating. She had no idea that the storm had only just begun to gather. The turquoise waters of the Maldives shimmered under the midday sun, the gentle waves lapping against the white sandy shores. It was a paradise on earth, a destination that promised romance, serenity, and the perfect escape from the world. As Mark and Emily stepped off the seaplane that had brought them to the island, they were greeted by the warm smiles of the resort staff and the scent of salt water in the air. For Emily, this was a dream come true, a second honeymoon in the most beautiful place she could imagine. For Mark, it was the perfect stage for his carefully crafted revenge. The days that followed were filled with luxury and indulgence. Mark spared no expense, ensuring that every moment of their stay was designed to make Emily feel as though she was living in a fantasy. They stayed in a private overwater villa where they could watch the sunset from their own infinity pool. They dined on gourmet meals, explored coral reefs together, and sipped cocktails on the beach as the sun dipped below the horizon. To anyone watching, they appeared to be the picture of a happy, devoted couple rekindling their love. But beneath the surface, Mark's mind was focused on the plan he had been meticulously preparing. Every smile he gave, every tender touch, was part of the act. Mark knew that the key to his revenge was timing. He needed to lull Emily into a false sense of security, to make her believe that everything was as perfect as it seemed. And Emily, caught up in the romance of the moment, fell for it completely. She had no idea that every word of love Mark whispered to her was laced with a hidden meaning, every promise a lie. Finally, the night of the big reveal arrived. Mark had arranged for a private dinner on the beach under a canopy of stars. The setting was breathtaking. Candles flickered in the warm breeze, and the sound of the ocean provided a soothing backdrop. Emily was radiant, her eyes shining with happiness as she took in the scene before her. She had never felt so in love, so sure that they had turned a corner in their marriage. As they sat down to dinner, Mark poured them both a glass of champagne. He raised his glass, his eyes fixed on Emily's. "To us," he said softly, "and to the truth." Emily tilted her head slightly, a puzzled smile on her face. "The truth?" Mark took a sip of his champagne, the cool liquid sliding down his throat like a bitter reminder of what was to come. He set the glass down and leaned forward, his expression suddenly serious. "Yes, Emily. The truth about us, about why we're really here." A slight tremor of unease passed through Emily, but she quickly pushed it aside. "Mark, what are you talking about?" Mark's voice remained calm, almost detached as he began to speak. "You see, Emily, this trip wasn't just about rekindling our marriage. It was about something much deeper, something you probably thought I would never find out." Emily's heart skipped a beat, her mind racing. "Mark, I don't understand." "Oh, I think you do," Mark interrupted, his tone now icy. "I know about you and Chris. I've known for a while now. The late-night texts, the secret meetings, all the lies you've been feeding me. I know everything, Emily." The color drained from Emily's face as the reality of what Mark was saying hit her like a ton of bricks. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She felt like the air had been sucked out of the world around her, leaving her in a void of cold, harsh truth. Mark continued, his voice growing colder with each word. "This trip? It was never about forgiveness. It was about showing you just how far I'm willing to go to make you pay for what you did, to make you feel as small and as powerless as you made me feel." Emily's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table, her mind reeling. "Mark, Please. I'm so sorry." But Mark was unmoved. "Sorry? It's too late for that, Emily. Do you think a simple apology can undo what you've done? The betrayal? The humiliation? No. This is where it ends for us." He stood up, looking down at her with a cold detachment that sent chills down her spine. "You're going to sit here and finish this dinner alone. When you go back to the villa, you'll find that I've taken all the money, the passports, everything. You're stranded here, Emily, in the middle of nowhere with no way to get home." Emily's eyes widened in horror as she realized the full extent of what Mark had done. "No, Mark, you can't do this. Please, don't leave me here." But Mark was already walking away, his footsteps crunching on the sand as he left her sitting there, stunned and alone. He didn't look back as he made his way down the beach, the sounds of Emily's desperate pleas fading into the distance. For Mark, the victory was bittersweet. He had orchestrated the perfect trap, and now Emily was paying the price for her betrayal. As he boarded the boat that would take him back to the mainland, he felt a sense of closure. The woman who had shattered his heart was now facing her own reckoning, and he was finally free. Emily sat frozen at the dinner table, her mind spinning as Mark's words echoed in her head. The romantic evening that had begun with laughter and champagne had spiraled into a nightmare she could never have imagined. She watched in stunned silence as Mark disappeared into the darkness, his figure becoming smaller and smaller until he was nothing more than a shadow on the horizon. Panic began to bubble up inside her, a rising tide of dread that threatened to drown her completely. Still, part of her refused to believe what was happening. She stumbled back to their villa, her breath coming in short, frantic gasps. As she entered, everything seemed just as they had left it. The bed neatly made, the soft glow of the lamps creating a warm, inviting atmosphere. But when she opened the drawer where she kept her purse and travel documents, reality came crashing down with devastating force. It was all gone. Her wallet, stuffed with cash and credit cards, was missing. Her passport, the one thing that could get her home, was nowhere to be found. Even her phone charger was missing, leaving her with a device that would soon be as dead as her hopes of escape. Mark had taken everything. Emily sank to the floor, her hands trembling as she tried to process the full extent of what Mark had done. He had left her stranded, thousands of miles from home, in a country where she knew no one and spoke none of the local language. A sob escaped her lips as the enormity of her situation set in. She was utterly alone, with no money, no identification, and no way to contact anyone who could help her. The next few hours were a blur of frantic attempts to find a solution. She searched every inch of the villa, hoping against hope that Mark had left something behind. But her search yielded nothing. She tried to use the hotel phone to call for help, but without her credit cards, she couldn't make an international call. The hotel staff, though kind, were limited in what they could do for a guest without proper identification or payment. They offered to call the embassy for her, but Emily knew that it could take days, even weeks, to resolve her situation through official channels. Despair began to claw at her, a deep, consuming fear that she would be trapped in this foreign land, unable to get back to the life she once knew. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mark's cold, detached expression as he told her he knew about the affair. The betrayal she had inflicted upon him was now turned against her in the most brutal way imaginable. As the hours ticked by, Emily found herself spiraling into a state of hopelessness. She wandered the empty villa like a ghost, her mind replaying the last few weeks over and over. How had she not seen this coming? How could she have underestimated the man she had once loved? The same man who had vowed to protect and cherish her had now become her undoing. The irony was bitter. Mark was the only person in the world who could save her from this hellish predicament. But he was long gone, flying back to a life that no longer included her. Morning came, and with it the harsh reality of her situation. Emily knew she had to act, but every option seemed impossible. She could barely think straight, her mind clouded by fear and exhaustion. She had never felt so vulnerable, so completely at the mercy of forces beyond her control. The hotel staff continued to check on her, offering what little comfort they could, but their sympathetic faces only made her feel more isolated. Eventually, Emily realized that there was no easy way out. She would have to contact the embassy and start the grueling process of proving her identity and arranging for emergency travel documents. But even that offered little solace. She knew that once she returned home, she would have to face the fallout of Mark's actions, the divorce, the loss of everything she had taken for granted, the public humiliation. Mark had ensured that her life as she knew it was over. As she sat on the edge of the bed, staring out at the endless blue ocean, Emily felt a profound emptiness settle over her. She had betrayed the man who loved her, and in return, he had destroyed her life. The woman she had been before that night, the confident, carefree Emily, was gone, replaced by someone who had been stripped of everything that mattered. And so, Emily was left with nothing but the crushing weight of her mistakes and the haunting memory of a love that had turned into something dark and vengeful. The paradise that had once seemed like a dream was now her prison, a constant reminder of the ultimate betrayal. Mark stepped off the plane, the familiar sights and sounds of home greeting him as he made his way through the airport. The weight that had burdened him for weeks, ever since he had discovered Emily's betrayal, was gone. In its place was a sense of satisfaction, a feeling of liberation that he hadn't experienced in years. He had done what he needed to do, taken back control of his life, and now he was free. Free from the lies, the deceit, and the constant gnawing doubt that had plagued him since the day he found those messages on Emily's phone. As he drove back to his house, Mark couldn't help but reflect on the events that had led him here. The revenge he had meticulously planned and executed had been harsh, but it had also been necessary. Emily had shattered his trust, and in doing so, she had destroyed the life they had built together. Leaving her stranded in the Maldives was his way of making sure she understood the gravity of her actions, of ensuring that she would never forget the pain she had caused him. Back at home, the house felt different. It was as if a dark cloud had lifted, leaving behind a space that was his and his alone. Mark wasted no time. The moment he walked through the door, he set about removing any trace of Emily from his life. Her clothes, her belongings, everything that reminded him of the woman who had betrayed him was packed away, ready to be donated or discarded. It was a cathartic process, one that helped him reclaim the dignity and peace of mind he had lost. Over the next few days, Mark filed for divorce, making sure to expedite the process as much as possible. He wanted nothing more to do with Emily, no further entanglements or complications. His lawyer assured him that given the circumstances, the proceedings would be swift and in his favor. Mark nodded, satisfied with the outcome. He had no intention of dragging this out longer than necessary. He was ready to move on, to start fresh. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Emily was living her own personal nightmare. It had taken her days of struggle and endless humiliation to finally secure a way back home. The embassy had been her only lifeline, but even they couldn't spare her the long wait for emergency travel documents. During that time, she had been forced to rely on the kindness of strangers, living in a constant state of fear and uncertainty. By the time she finally boarded a plane back home, she was a shell of the woman who had once confidently boarded a flight to paradise. When Emily arrived at what used to be their home, the reality of her situation hit her like a sledgehammer. The locks had been changed, and her key no longer worked. She stood on the doorstep, disoriented and exhausted, her heart pounding in her chest. It was only when she saw the envelope taped to the door that she realized just how much had changed. Inside was a formal letter from Mark's lawyer, informing her that divorce proceedings were already underway and that she was no longer welcome in the house. The cold, clinical language of the letter was like a slap in the face. Everything she had feared, everything she had tried to avoid was now staring her in the face. Mark had moved on without her, leaving her to pick up the pieces of a life she had destroyed with her own hands. Over the following weeks, Emily tried to reach out to Mark, desperate for some form of reconciliation or at least closure. But Mark had made his decision, and there was no going back. He ignored her calls, her messages, and her pleas for forgiveness. For him, this chapter of his life was closed, and he had no intention of reopening old wounds. Mark's life gradually began to return to a new normal. He immersed himself in work, reconnected with old friends, and even started to entertain the idea of dating again. The anger and bitterness that had once consumed him were replaced by a quiet sense of contentment. He had taken back control of his life, and in doing so, he had regained a sense of self-worth that had been lost during his marriage to Emily. As for Emily, she was left to deal with the consequences of her actions. The divorce was finalized quickly, with Mark retaining most of their assets. She moved into a small apartment, far from the life of comfort and security she had once known. The affair that had once seemed so exciting and fulfilling had cost her everything: her marriage, her home, her dignity. The man she had betrayed was now the one who had the last word, and she was left with nothing but the haunting memories of a love she had thrown away. In the end, Mark emerged victorious. He had faced the ultimate betrayal, and he had come out on top, stronger and wiser for the experience. Emily was left to deal with the fallout of her choices, a painful reminder that actions have consequences. As Mark looked towards the future, he knew that he would be fine. He had his life back, and with it, the freedom to write a new chapter, one that no longer included the woman who had betrayed him. If you enjoyed this story of revenge and overcoming betrayal, don't forget to hit the like button. It helps us keep bringing you more intense stories like this one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe to the Only Stories About Men channel so you don't miss any of our thrilling tales of betrayal, revenge, and new beginnings. Tap the notification bell to stay updated with all our latest content. See you in the next story.